So here's the thing about Butcher and Homelander from The Boys. Despite being on two opposite sides of a conflict, and while one earns much more love from the audience than the other, their behavior is extremely similar, and these two men follow alike patterns when facing adversity and pursuing their goals. There's a reason why there's so many parallels between these two in the show, and that they are almost destined to have a final showdown with just the two of them.
You and I. Well, what if we share a different destiny? A little more scorched earth. And in the end, only one of us left standing. Isn't that what you want?
Too fucking right.
Stated by Homelander himself. Really, getting us to root for Butcher is just a matter of perspective, and oftentimes they play around with that perspective to get us to actively root against Butcher, even if we hate Homelander and generally wish for him to lose. All in all, it's great commentary about how goodness and evil can live side by side in one person, and how a hero and a villain conceptually might not be very different from one another, especially in a universe like The Boys, where that line is constantly blurred and heroes are constantly tested and used for others' benefits. In an increasingly complex world, those tragic backstories that typically create strong heroes that end up saving the world actually wind up creating emotionally stunted people who can't adjust later in life and end up perceiving heroism in the worst way. I mean, there are so many heroes with tragic backstories that go on to be a great person and to triumph over that tragedy. But in this society where they don't have such a simple path forward in front of them, they end up struggling to make their own decisions and sink into their worst and most unhealthy tendencies. They're even introduced, Butcher and Homelander, in the same way. Both of them starting the first episode as perceived heroes, only to shatter those expectations later near the end of the episode. Homelander killing an innocent child and others on a plane to further the goals of his employer and mommy, and Butcher revealing himself as not an FBI agent who actually fights for the law, but instead a relentless man possessed by vengeance.
Technically, I'm not a fade.
There are a couple specific reasons why Butcher and Homelander are such similar characters. But before we get into all these similarities, I have a serious question for all of you. If Vought was real, would you want them accessing your personal information whenever you went online? I know I wouldn't. Vought scares the living hell out of me, but even in real life, there's scary people out there online who want to do some downright scummy stuff with your personal data. But there are now solutions for that. One of those being Surfshark VPN, one of the best ways to ensure that you are surfing the web as safely as possible. And they have been kind enough to sponsor this video. It's like if you had translucence power. You're invisible to everyone you don't want to see you. Your information is secure and private, completely encrypted so that there's no way for it to be seen. You don't gotta worry about being watched or followed after visiting your favorite sites. Plus, you completely avoid the risks of using public Wi-Fi, which allows you access for pretty much anywhere you travel, especially since Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in over 100 different locations. I've been actually using it myself, and it's honestly such a weight off my back as I download quite a bit of assets to make these videos, and not from the most reputable sites, if I may add. But having this and the antivirus software on my computer really set me at ease. So feel free to try out Surfshark using the link below in the description, or going to surfshark.com/PTVT for an extra 4 months on the house. Plus, if you don't like it, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no sweat if you just want to try it out. But now, back to the main reasons Butcher and Homelander are so similar. One is that they both suffered through abuse as children, and eventually grew up to resent and fight back against those who abused them, also trying to distinguish themselves from those who abused them, with Homelander saying he's better than the people who experimented on and tortured him because he's not human, and instead is something better than they are. And Butcher beating on his father out of revenge, trying to deny that his father is indeed a part of him, and that part of him is coming out in this beatdown. And this is yet another thing that they both have in common. As much as they'd like to deny that those aspects are a part of them, in the end, they will always be tethered to that piece of themselves. Homelander is human. As much as he'd like to think that he's better and above everything that was done to him, he is still, at his core, a human being who needs love, respect, and attention. He's admitted this to himself in the mirror, as well as hearing it from Barbara, that he'll never really be able to escape that need, no matter what he does to other people or to himself.
I don't need any of it anymore.
Doesn't matter what you do to Mayor or the rest of the staff here. Your need for love is so deep. It's so human. You'll never be able to overcome that.
That's where you're wrong. I'm not human, and neither is my son. And I'm gonna raise him so that he knows it.
And I'm sure Barbara later regretted saying this, as her fate was, let's just say, most unwelcome. But she was right. Homelander is human, and killing all of his abusers did nothing to absolve him of that weight. After all, did you see him after he thought that he'd lost at the end of season 4? He was a blubbering mess, thinking he had lost all of his allies and his public image. He's a human being who feels the weight of his failures, and he'll never be able to cast that away, despite how much he wants to or thinks he can become smooth, like marble. That is impossible, no matter how many superpowers you have. I especially loved when he killed Madeline at the end of season 1, acting as if he didn't need her, but makes Doppelganger transform into her in the next season, so he can still receive that love, even if it is from a masquerade. I found that kinda hilarious, and extremely telling about Homelander and his villainous front versus what he's actually feeling inside. And once he casts Doppelganger away as well, he finds Stormfront pretty much immediately. He'd love to think that he doesn't need the love of any of these women, but he does. And even when he pushes them away to prove that to himself, he draws someone else in. He needs love, attention, and admiration as much as he doesn't want to admit it. And while he might proclaim himself to be the only man in the sky, at the end of the day, even if you can fly all the way above the clouds, you are still a man. And Butcher is his father's son. Not to say that he couldn't grow out of it if he truly tried to. We saw at the beginning of season 3 that Butcher can definitely go through brief periods of sobriety and development, but he has stepped farther back than he's moved forward by the end of season 4. And he always ends up leaning into the qualities that he observed from his father when he was growing up. Don't be such a fucking puff all your life. You've got to be hard to survive in the world. And everything else his piece of shit dad taught him. We saw this firsthand in season 3 when he was hallucinating from Mindstorm's power. He even hit the person closest to him, his brother Lenny, after relying on those violent instincts, and after being rejected by somebody he respected. More on this later. He just can't control those impulses. He needs those good influences in his life, and it mirrors this to his punch against Huey in season 2, showing that it's not something Butcher ever really grew out of, and it is a cycle he is destined to repeat, which we see later with Ryan. He grows closer and closer, but ultimately decides to push him away and distance himself as he spirals downward and sinks further into the mold that his father sculpted for him to fit inside. He does believe that even if his father is a total piece of shit, and that he himself can be a total piece of shit at times, that the world can only be affected by being ruthless and uncompromising, which is what he resolves to be over and over, despite his conscience's best intentions, or his dead wife. They both feel that whatever they do, even if ultimately disgusting or wrong, is warranted in the face of the immense cruelty or injustice that they saw as children or in the world daily. Homelander deserves to trample over human lives because he earned that time by being tortured by them for so long. They each have developed a type of hero complex through the adversity they faced when they were being raised. Butcher was always saving his younger brother, and it's implied that he tried to protect his mother from his father as well, which would give him a sense of importance that only grew over time, even if he's not his own biggest fan, because he does have a piece of his father inside of him. Even if he falls back on his worst impulses, like we see at the end of season 4, he still feels that he's the hero of the story, and that he's going to change things for the better by killing Homelander and using this virus to get rid of all soups. It's a really narcissistic way of looking at yourself, and is the reason why his own ideals, or rather his father's, get so out of control at multiple points during this show. He doesn't take other people's advice, and instead just relies on himself and what he knows. And in that echo chamber, he can constantly hear his father's voice bouncing off the walls, and not many others, even if he may despise the man. In dysfunctional families, it's a common role for children to assume in the household as a coping mechanism that they then carry into their adult life. Children, or older, specifically firstborn children, love to prove themselves as heroes. So even if he does utilize underhanded and morally bankrupt methods to achieve his goals, whatever he does, there's a subconscious belief that he will be rewarded and loved by those that he's trying to protect, and he is on the right side of every conflict, no matter what his methods or how violent his methods may be. Even if he basically double-crosses Huey and the entire group at the end of season 4, he's doing all of this in a roundabout way, to protect him and the others that he actually cares about, which, you know, does not include Annie, as well as for his own selfish need for revenge. Both can be true at once, and also they're both selfish, so. But as Aaron Leonard, PhD, says, to be the hero, the narcissist needs to create a bad guy, and as the victim, he gives himself license to mistreat others free from repercussions. I've linked the article that this is from below. I mean, once you start seeing yourself as the hero, when do you stop? As another part of this survival strategy, he hides his true emotions, and he can't really connect well with others, except in a work-related or leadership fashion. Hence, the boys, or, you know, as he describes it, the Spice Girls.
What's Sporty Spice up to? Who? Sporty fucking Spice, what's she up to? When they're apart, they're absolute fucking rubbish. But you put them together, they're the goddamn fucking Spice Girls.
As Butcher's fear for the future grows, along with the impending deadline that the tumor of Compound V holds over him, he does not share it with anyone, and instead resolves to sink further and further into accomplishments and achievements. And when he can't get things done the desired way, or the way that Becca is advocating, he just falls back on what he knows regardless of the consequences. You know, like everyone he cares about losing who they love. Like I said, he has brief moments of lucidity where he can recognize that he is like his father and is hurting other people. But again, more often than not, he still resolves to follow that instinct anyway. And Homelander is the same in this regard. He grew up in a lab his entire life. Barely anyone treated him with even the remotest kindness, and one of the only solaces he could hope for is that all of their experiments in torture would succeed and make him the strongest hero known to man who would be loved by all. That was his destiny, and it was told to him from an extremely young age. It's hard to imagine how he couldn't develop this extreme sense of narcissism and self-importance from this deadly combination of misery and being put on a pedestal. So even later in life, when he does the most reprehensible shit, he can still paint himself, in his own mind at least, as the good guy, eventually going so far to declare himself as better than human, to justify and invalidate the crimes he commits against humanity on a daily basis. And his own mind can do all of this because of how much he's suffered. That hero syndrome is so strong in Homelander that it can't be compromised by obviously unheroic acts. Speaking to the heights of abuse that he faced within that underground lab, he sinks so far into this mentality, after all, that he abandons his former non-hero self entirely. John doesn't really exist anymore, and he insists that Homelander is who he truly is.
How long's it been, John?
Long enough that no one calls me John anymore.
John?
Homelander. Just Homelander. Hey, Marty. Good to see you.
You too. Homelander.
It doesn't help that his human self was not really treated as human for such a long time, and he doesn't even seem to have been given a last name, which is bizarre. And this is all why he freaks out so much when Randy Setdeck puts a blanket on his fake bed in season 1.
I'm sorry. Why is that there?
Sorry?
Who put the fucking blanket on the bed?
Randy Setdeck.
Who's Randy Setdeck?
He's over there.
Randy, why?
It's easy for him to pretend and make believe about his childhood when none of it remotely reminds him of his own, and he can sink further into this fake hero image that he's built up for such a long time. And when there's a real reminder of his childhood, it is a crack in that perception that he has of his hero self. Not only because it's real, but because it makes him look like a victim, weak, less than those around him, as if he needed a blanket to feel safe, even with his immense power as a child. No, he wants to paint himself as a god from birth. There's a detail in episode 4 of season 4 where you can see John abandon that identity to become the Homelander as he grows up, and eventually just Homelander, thanks to Madeline, who we'll talk more about later.
We should drop the. Just Homelander is better.
Most people don't even blame him for massacring the people who work there, especially the ones who were there from when he was raised and tortured. In his mind, as you can imagine, it's vindicating. It's a win. He has defeated his perceived villains, and he can designate whoever he wants into this position to justify these evil acts, whether it be Starlight, other heroes, or an innocent man who threw a can of soda at his son despite the fact that his son is quite literally bulletproof. Another thing these two have in common common is that both are not really interested in what is morally correct and ultimately do whatever is necessary to further their own goals. Homelander is really only worried about his personal image and being perceived as a hero, and then receiving as much love as possible from everyone around him. I mean, the end of season 3 alone shows that Homelander doesn't really feel sympathy for taking any lives and was only holding back for the fear that others would criticize him for doing so. He thought that the only way to get people to love him was to be the traditional, all-American superhero that we are conditioned to see. In the public eye, at least. Or, at least at the beginning of the show, to get the approval of Madeline, his surrogate mother figure when he's first establishing himself. I mean, he even has this whole Bible-thumping, average Joe image across America at first, when we know he doesn't even think about God at all. If anything, he thinks that he is God.
Your brand is hope, baseball, America, sunshine. You don't do vengeance.
Even when he first started out and saw his goal as being a true hero, he was really only ever doing it to earn the attention, praise, and love that he never received in his childhood. He even bills himself as a true human with a past, including a Little League baseball team and 2 present parents. When he goes in early to stop the terrorists,
Hold position, Black Noir en route, ETA 14 minutes.
Don't let some murderous mute psycho get in your way.
These hostages don't have 14 minutes. I'm going in.
Wait, Homelander.
it's not because the hostages don't have 14 minutes, it's because he doesn't want to share the spotlight with Noir and wants all the glory for himself. We can see from his first appearance in front of a crowd that he needs the attention to be able to thrive. As soon as he tastes it, he becomes addicted after having been deprived of it for so long. But after finding out that he could still earn that same recognition and do whatever impulse came to his mind on the side, and that he didn't actually have to save anyone to be able to play the hero, he gradually turns into the uncaring, cold narcissist that we meet at the beginning of the series. I don't imagine that this happened quickly either, and it's certainly aided by who he's surrounded by at Vought, mostly Madeline, but nonetheless, constantly being able to fulfill any impulse without inhibition because of the view that you are a hero who can never do wrong will do awful things to your psyche and desensitize you to every mistake or intentional error that you ever made. I mean, he straight up aligns himself with a Nazi in season 2. Not because he's a Nazi, but because he's indifferent about who he needs to align himself with or what he needs to do to earn the love that he craves so badly. After all, that's what Stormfront was offering him, both with her own body and also with her ability to shape his public image. And also because he holds no value in human lives. To him, all of them are the villains, so he doesn't care what Stormfront wants to do to them. He doesn't care what image he needs to project as long as it's the image that the most people really like. While Butcher really only cares about revenge for Becca. He clearly doesn't place as much importance in honoring her memory as we see from the fact that he chooses Kessler over her in his own mind at the end of season 4. And it isn't out of love either that he takes this revenge on. I think he did love her at one point, but there is a common theme to put these I have to make things right for her men on a pedestal, even when they idolize the memory of a woman far more than they ever should. I mean, Becca herself states in season 2 that Butcher puts her on a pedestal and believes that she could save him, but she never actually knew how to do that.
You put me on this pedestal, and the truth is, I never knew how to save you. You were always one bad day away from pounding someone to death in a parking lot.
That's not true.
And season 4 proved that with the reveal that Butcher cheated on her as well. I think that this was a really smart addition to their relationship that previously felt so pure and perfect, showing that Butcher, even when with Becca to, quote, tame him, he still falls into his flaws from time to time, likely when he probably felt particularly awful about his own self. We've seen multiple times that he also chooses his one-sided pursuit of vengeance against Homelander over his friends and everything that he holds dear, even when he knows that Becca wouldn't want him to. He sacrifices Ryan to Stan Edgar to keep Becca all to himself. It is not love, it's selfishness. And it comes from that belief that he is the hero. He manipulates those around him to fight with him, only to be able to use them without a second thought. I mean, he brought Huey into all of this for the quote, sake of Robin, but we all know that he didn't give a shit about Robin from the start. When they have a small chance of living without the last dose of the virus, he suggests that they just try and run, even though a ton of them could die a violent and a horrid death on the run back, specifically those without powers. And when Raynor offers him everything the boys wanted except for Homelander, aka what he wanted, he refused it, lied to the boys, and single-mindedly decided to barrel forward toward what he wanted without any thought for what anyone else was feeling. They all get burned and outed because they don't have this protection and end up having to go on the lam. Loses his family and everyone loses their lives, all for Butcher's selfish agenda, and frankly, he couldn't care less. He never even really apologized, and if he did, it was rather cheeky. He has one goal in his mind, and nothing is going to get in his way. Not Huey, not Starlight, not not anyone. While Huey raises an objection to the violence and blood that the fight costs them, Butcher just states that that is the game, and that it's unavoidable if they are to get what they want. In his case, revenge for Becca. He isn't honoring her memory or trying to get her justice. It's a selfish pursuit to satisfy his own need for violence, destruction, and his hero fantasy, as Becca is the one who will save and tame him. I mean, Christ, he can't even let Becca's family grieve in the first season because of his thick-headedness. He has to be right, and he has to be the hero. Even if he wanted to continue investigating Becca's disappearance, there is no reason, other than self-centeredness, that he should feel the need to destroy the grave they bought. Not to mention how expensive tombstones are, my god. He's only thinking about how he feels and what he wants to believe, never the feelings of others. Another thing these two have in common is that they both have an extremely low sense of self-worth. Without the love and adoration of his fans, Homelander breaks down. He has no faith in himself if he doesn't have people around him chanting his name, even with his insane abilities. I mean, he doesn't even have a sense of self beyond the image of Homelander. He's nothing without it. We see in season 2 when he really hits a low point in the public eye how it can really affect his mental state. I mean, it's one of the funniest scenes in my opinion, but when Homelander is scrolling through memes at his expense and kind of losing his mind, it is extremely alarming. He literally can't handle it because their perception of himself is his perception. Because Homelander is all he is. And when the crowd at the Newman rally begins chanting against him, he nearly massacres the entire troop and wants to unleash unimaginable violence onto these people that can't stand him but are ultimately innocent. Feeling the need to lash out like that when you're being hurt by others is the #1 sign of insecurity and low self-worth. It comes from fear of being abandoned or left alone. When he was a kid, he was left in a room by himself for days on end with no contact to any other human. The abandonment he must have felt as a child is immense, and with the prospect of feeling that again, the only thing he can do is go on a rampage. Especially when you gift children with terrifyingly powerful abilities. I mean, Vought, are you fucking stupid or something? My god. And in season 3, when he's forced to repent for being with Stormfront as the public opinion on him declines, we see him in a really depressive state. He's not his maniacal, humorous self. Instead, he picks on those around him just to make himself feel bigger.
Yummers.
And sulks around the sets that he's on, moving from job to job with no real sense of purpose. He's really a shell of himself. It shows that he isn't really full unless he has other people backing him up. The reason he's so dangerous in season 4 is because he's now showing his true self to the world, and he still has people backing him. While Butcher sees himself as his father, whom he can't stand, and feels that he isn't able to progress without someone else to rely on. As much as I love the whole canary analogy for Huey's relationship with Butcher that proposes,
Huey's not gonna make it. And you need that kid. More than any one of us. He's your canary.
What canary?
You let your canary die? How you gonna know when you've gone too far?
What a load of bollocks.
It is super unhealthy that Butcher seemingly cannot operate and progress without other people. There's nothing wrong with getting help, no doubt about that, but you shouldn't need to always rely on others to be consistently good. Butcher in season 2 is on the up and up until Becca refuses him and then he immediately sinks down. That is not healthy. His happiness is entirely dependent on these other people. It's portrayed that Butcher doesn't really really know how to be alone. He can't walk along the right path without someone chirping in his ear, whether that be Lenny, Becca, Huey, or even MM sometimes. He needs someone else to prove to him that he can be around others without hurting them. He needs someone to remind him that he can be loved. And it isn't because of his personality that everyone hates him. It's because of the mistakes that he makes. After all, when you are physically abused over and over as a child, you can sometimes take blame onto yourself, even inadvertently, assuming that you must have done something wrong simply by being yourself. The person is supposed to love and care for you, so if they aren't, there must be something wrong with you. It's obviously not correct, and so terribly tragic to think about, but it is an idea that can come into someone's head after repeated physical abuse from someone who is so close to them. So when he doesn't have that person, he sinks further and further down into his own self-loathing and falls back on those awful habits because what's the point? He's awful to the core and can't change, right? So why try? I'm just gonna go beat up this guy in a random heavy metal show because I just love violence, and then get my ass beat too because I deserve it. Not unless somebody else comes along and convinces him that he can be better. And sometimes even that isn't enough, as we see from season 4. Even with his support system, he simply can't resist that dark path when faced with ultimate failure. Which brings us to the next point, where both of these men were twisted by their pursuits. Homelander started out as a rather naive, idealistic hero hoping to save the world, almost reminiscent of Annie's start at the beginning of The Boys or when she was a child. It isn't necessarily pure, as if they just want to help people. It's also for the attention and praise. For Annie, she was put on that path by her mother, and for Homelander, he never received that attention. But they do still generally want to do good things and be known as a good person, at first. In 1 + 1 = 2, which is an episode not of The Boys, but of Diabolical, which I would recommend watching even if you don't watch the whole series, it's not necessary to, we see Homelander right at the start of his career as a superhero for Vought. He feels the praise from the crowd for the first time and quickly becomes addicted to it. He's never even had any attention before, besides when they'd shove him in a furnace to experiment on his skin. It's not hard to imagine how insanely good that must have felt after so long. Not to mention that Madeline Stillwell, and by extension Stan Edgar, seek to control him from his very first day on set, guiding him toward that praise and even sexually harassing him in an effort to control him further. Vought is largely responsible for creating Homelander. She sees that need for attention and fuels it to be able to completely direct his agenda and further her own career. She pits him against Black Noir and essentially causes the crisis at the chemical compound, which is honestly the catalyst for Homelander realizing that he doesn't actually need to do good to look good. He just needs to act nice to get what he really needs. It's not like he was raised lovingly to care about those around him and truly worry for their well-being. He was never taught those values. He never had that moral foundation. And then he discovered he can live with intense gore. That is a dangerous combination. I mean, honestly, he's seen so much gore on his own body from the torture that he endured for years in that underground lab, so it isn't exactly new to him. And you can see this in this episode, where when he brutalizes these terrorists or the hostages, he's not really shocked at the gore or horrified at his behavior. He's more shocked at how fragile they are, which only contributes to him seeing them as less than he is. And when you see this unadulterated violence and realize that you can still move forward, face the press, sleep soundly at night, Noir will be your best friend, it changes something in you. And from then on, Homelander just moved further and further into that desensitization. And that's how we got to the Homelander that we know and hate today. He got better and better at covering it up as well, faking emotions and sympathy until it becomes as easy as breathing, as we can see by the time the show begins.
Said they didn't have to die.
We arrived 3 minutes after the plane went down.
Excuse me. But if they let us into the military,
Then this will never happen again. That is my solemn promise to you.
God bless you. God bless America.
We hear you, Homelander!
And I hear you, brother! I hear you! And the world hears you! And very, very soon, my friend, whoever did this to us will hear from all of us!
And being proven to be the strongest over and over again will do wonders for a man's ego, as you can imagine. Even if you do start out as a humble person who has been through a lot of darkness in the past, that kind of unchecked power can twist you around. And even with authority figures who try to control him, and a whole company basically that tries to control him, he repeatedly proves to himself that he is uncontested. Until Soldier Boy comes along and shows him that more powerful people actually can exist. I mean, that's why he's so afraid of Soldier Boy. Not only because he can best him in combat and actually hurt him, but it also means that he is vulnerable. And if that's exposed to everyone, that would mean the end of this godlike image that he has built for himself, and that he tries to hold up in his own mind. As much as he would love to be above human, he can still be hurt and beaten. Shattering that perception that he's on top of the world is a huge blow to his ego. While Butcher becomes single-minded as his goal becomes more unattainable. He goes through the series only really wanting one thing: to bring Homelander down by any means necessary, whether Becca is alive or not. Now, we know that before the show, he already had his first swing at getting a real crack at Homelander through Lamplighter, and lost out big time. So, when the show starts, he's already a little bit more desperate than when he started this endeavor, and moved further into that gloomy, diabolical version of himself. He goes too far in one direction, and struggles to find his way back, even if he does try very hard. He uses Huey, he doesn't care about Annie, and oftentimes Kimiko, and he falls into the mentality that there are, quote, no good soups. You could see some cracks here and there, like when he meets the soup baby. He's almost endearingly sweet to this infant in season 1, asking him not to become an issue that he would have to take care of, which shows you that he does, or is capable of, thinking of this idea as not so black and white.
You little fucking beauty. Now you keep your nose clean, sunshine. I'll come back and stump you.
But he does fall onto this all soups are bad mentality quite often. He tries to work with them, but once he's lost and moved further from the one thing that he cares about, he just grows resentful of them entirely, seeing them as a different species. I wonder who this sounds like. A different species.
You've been helping these fucking mud people.
And he only grows more desperate over time. When they're running from the law in season 2 and Becca is actually in his sights, when they aren't making progress against any soups in season 3, when Ryan isn't listening to him in season 4 and he has a looming deadline. Every season there are more events thrown in his way to prevent him from getting what he wants, and it only makes him more and more hopeless, which makes him seek the shortcuts. The violence, the underhandedness, giving up his friends, ways to get what he wants faster than the right way. He even gives up his own body to become a soup, something that he hates, showing his really deep self-loathing and his not real regard for any of his own well-being. If you noticed, he becomes crueler to those around him too as the seasons go on. While it is a back and forth between self-reflection and self-pity, there is a definite downward spiral in terms of how he treats others. Maybe it's just because it's a TV show and it's trying to top itself, but the ways Butcher fucks over those around him gets so much more intense over the seasons. I mean, we went from trying to prevent Huey from dating Annie, to punching Huey in the face in season 2, then to punching Huey in the face in season 3, then to actively killing Huey's main ally in his grand scheme at the end of season 4. He dislikes Annie in season 1 vehemently for sure, but in season 4 he treats Annie like an arch enemy. He'll fight with her because he wants the other members of his team to love and accept him, but he doesn't really see her as human in any aspect, even when she possesses more innate humanity than he himself does. And you know, in season 1, when he threatens Madeline and has a bomb against her chest, he makes sure that her son and the babysitter are safe. Meanwhile, in season 2, when he threatens Dr. Vogelbaum, he's willing to put his entire family up as collateral, including the children.
Because I'm about to go into that room next door to your daughter, and I'm gonna bash her brains out. And then I'm gonna find your 2 sons and their wives and their little kiddies. Your whole fucking family dies today.
Fuck. You are dark, and I kind of like it.
To be fair, he does give an admirable try to be better in season 4, but the fact that there's a V'd-up tumor in his brain summoning Kessler at every opportunity does put a damper on his best efforts. Not to say that I don't blame him for turning to Kessler, because I do. However, as Kessler says, it is simply a part of his own brain, and while he does have that goodness inside of him, like I said earlier, it does live side by side with violence and malice. And sometimes, violence and malice are much louder, especially when you don't have many options left. Giving up is a really tough thing to do, and when you've played the hero your entire life, that really isn't an option in your repertoire. Butcher is dying at the end of season 4. He doesn't have another choice. If he fails with Ryan here, it is over. He needs to see things through, and he needs to succeed. As a child, he prided himself on being able to protect everyone near and dear to him, so failing to do that now means that he failed everyone that he cared about, and he simply cannot accept that, which is why he turns to Kessler. Both are really just little boys looking for love and attention. That's another reason that they have in common. Neither of them ever really had a real childhood or anyone to raise them properly, and as a result, they never really grew up. They just became overgrown children with the same issues they've had since they were 5 years old. Homelander is still the same little boy who's afraid of being left alone and unloved. He needs the adoring fans and the doting girlfriend to be able to trump that childhood that was completely devoid of that loving atmosphere. At the prospect of having a real father when he learns about Soldier Boy, Homelander almost completely reverts into a child. He greets Soldier Boy with tears in his eyes, begging him to love him and accept him, which ends up getting Soldier Boy to be disappointed in him inadvertently. Honestly, besides the twisted sexual relationship he had with Madeline, this is the first time we see him admit his own humanity. It shows what his deepest need actually is. He's willing to completely throw down this hero facade and return to John in the face of real, familial human connection. It's what he actually needs at the end of the day. Ryan was an astonishing discovery to him, where he previously thought that the closest thing he would get to familial love, the kind of love that he craved the most, would be a wife or a girlfriend, or surrogate mommy, which is why he tried to force those connections, or forge imaginary ones with those who didn't even have blood ties to him. But afterward, he discovered someone who could love him like he always needed, and then found someone else who had a genetic tie. Having one blood tie is one thing for Homelander. His son is beyond important to him, but being able to create an entire family dynamic with those who are of the same caliber as he is the ultimate dream that he's always had but never thought he would be able to achieve. And so when Ryan hangs out with Butcher once in season 4, Homelander's insecurity causes him to lash out, as he can't really accept the fact that his own family would be head over heels in love with him. After all, this is what he's craved his entire life, more than anything. And now, in season 4, he's discovered that he doesn't have as much time as he'd wished left, finding gray hairs in his head. He can't accept being this close to what he's always needed and not being able to 100% achieve it, especially when the reason he can't bond meaningfully with his son is because he possesses qualities that he fundamentally can't understand. In his eyes, Ryan has everything he could possibly want. A present father who loves him and can teach him about his own body like nobody else can. So he can't fathom why he would need anything else when Ryan just kind of possesses more humanity than he does at this point. He's still a child, while Homelander is the grizzled, tired adult who has been through years and years of abuse, being used, and senseless violence. While Butcher is still the child who wants to be accepted and loved for who he is from those around him and then lashes out when he isn't. Pursuing those who can love him is his main goal. Even when he's surrounded with others who do actually care for him, he usually has somebody he places on a higher pedestal, like Huey or Becca. In season 2, after he discovers that Becca is alive, he's willing to betray quite literally every other member of the group to be able to get back to her. I mean, hell, he was unbelievably determined just to avenge her because she loved him in season 1 before he knew she was alive still. And you can see how this is affected by him being rejected by those around him. He sinks further into those tendencies when he feels that deep rejection and lovelessness that his father made him feel. In his past, we can see that when the school kicks him out and he's rejected by his peers, he reverts into the habits his father showed around the house, simply beating on those who belittled him. That's why he's so forceful when people don't agree with his agenda. When Huey turns on him in season 2, he sees that as Huey rejecting who he truly is and lashes out as a result. When Ryan turns on him and kills Grace, it doesn't take long for him to fully endorse Kessler and make the final choice to follow his instincts. He doesn't have anything left to turn to except for this pursuit that he is enduring for the sake of Becca, so he says. And he can't accomplish that by listening to his conscience, even if his conscience is Becca. At the end of the day, Butcher feels that if he does the work, he should be rewarded with love and acceptance, but when he's still rejected, as he's used to for being himself, he loses his understanding of the purpose of that growth. Ultimately, Butcher and Homelander share a lot of the same issues. It's hard not to see that they are similar people, despite their wildly different upbringings and statuses in society in the present. They both react to pushback in the same way and grow frustrated with their own failings quite easily. Plus, even with different childhoods, they were both deprived of love and acceptance, which led them to becoming the men they are today, which are undeniably villains, even if they still see themselves as the hero. Like I said, sometimes it just lives side by side. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty. That's PosiTVty. There you get all these videos early, you get to vote on what you want to see on the channel, and you get the unedited essays so you get to hear all my mistakes. Plus, you can join as a free member. So if you just want to get a little 2-minute preview early before the video comes out on YouTube, you can get that as well. So go there for extra content, but I appreciate all the support we get on here as well. Subscribing, liking, commenting, engagement is fun, and I love discussing these shows with you. So if you enjoyed, leave a comment below, and let's talk about the boys more. It's been a little bit of a break, but I'm glad to be back. And I'll see you for the next video. What should it be? You decide. No, that's, what was that? That was epic rap battles? Anyway, end it. Bye.